There is a particular kind of confusion that is not the result of insufficient information. It is not the confusion that arrives when you do not know enough facts. It is the confusion that arrives when what you thought you were sure of begins to soften at the edges, when the direction you were moving in stops feeling like a direction and starts feeling like a question mark, when your own drive turns back on itself and asks whether what it has been pushing toward is what it actually wants, or whether it has simply been moving because movement was familiar and stillness felt like giving up. That is the confusion available today, and it is not a failure of your intelligence. It is a symptom of a sky that is doing something to the landscape of motivation itself. April 11th, 2026. Mars, the planet that governs, drive, ambition, the body's willingness to move, and the part of you that commits to a direction and holds it under pressure, is currently in Aries, its home sign, theoretically at its most powerful. But Mars is not simply in Aries today. Mars is walking, degree by degree, toward an exact conjunction with Neptune. That conjunction perfects on April 13th, 2 days from now, which means that today, April 11th, you are living inside the approach. Inside the moment when the planet of sharpness and direction is so close to the planet of dissolution and vision that you can feel them bleeding into each other without yet knowing what the combined thing will become. This is not a small transit. Mars conjunct Neptune in Aries does not happen frequently. When it does happen, it tends to mark a period where the engine of your life encounters something it cannot push through. Not because the engine has failed, but because Neptune does not have a surface for the engine to push against. You cannot force your way through Neptune. You cannot out-strategy a fog. You cannot sprint toward a horizon that keeps dissolving as you approach it. And so Mars, which is excellent at sprinting and forcing and holding a direction under pressure, finds itself in an unusual situation. It finds itself being asked to navigate without the tools it most trusts. The question today is not whether you are strong enough. You are. The question is whether you are willing to move differently than you have been moving, to trust something other than your usual forward momentum as your navigation system, to let the fog that Neptune is casting over the territory ahead do its actual job, which is not to obstruct you, but to redirect you towards something truer than the direction your force was carrying you toward on its own. You are already in the middle of this. The strangeness of the past few days, if you have been paying attention to it, is not your imagination. Something in the motivational field has shifted. Something that was clear is less clear. And that is not a problem, that is the transit working. Your birth chart holds the specific story of how this transit is landing in your life, in which house, touching which natal planets, activating which themes. A personal reading built from your exact time and place of birth decodes the layers beneath the collective forecast. Your sun, moon, and rising read with real precision, your soul's focus area explored in depth, the karmic patterns beneath your choices surfaced clearly. It covers your month-by-month forecast for 2026 mapped directly onto your own chart, and closes with a personal transmission about where you are and what your soul is preparing to receive. Delivered as an audio reading and a detailed PDF report to your inbox within 48 hours. The link is below. To understand the full character of this moment, you need to see Mars and Neptune not in isolation, but inside the architecture of everything else the sky is currently holding. Because Mars approaching Neptune does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a cluster of planetary energy in the early degrees of Aries that is one of the most significant and most unusual configurations of this entire year. And the moon in Aquarius adds a further dimension that changes what is available to you today if you know how to work with it. Mars entered Aries on April 9th, 2 days ago. Its entry into this sign was the beginning of a homecoming. Mars rules Aries. It is the planetary governor of this fire sign, which means that when Mars is in Aries, it is operating from its most natural and most comfortable position. The usual astrology would suggest that Mars in Aries is the time of maximum drive, of boldness, of the ability to begin things quickly and hold direction under pressure with unusual ease. And that energy is present, but it is being profoundly modified by what Mars is walking toward. Neptune has been in the early degrees of Aries since early in this year, moving slowly as outer planets do, sitting in the territory that Mars has just entered. Neptune in Aries is a striking placement. Aries is the sign of the individual will, of the self that declares its existence and moves on its own behalf. Neptune is the planet of dissolution, of transcendence, of the dissolving of separate identity into something larger. These two forces are not natural companions. Aries is about the boundary of the self. Neptune erases boundaries. Together, in the sign that governs individual selfhood and the courage to act on one's own behalf, they create a period when the question of what you are actually acting on behalf of becomes impossible to avoid. Saturn is also in early Aries, having entered this sign in February. Saturn is the planet of structure, of honest accountability, of the long view that refuses to be seduced by anything that cannot sustain its weight in real time and real life. Saturn conjunct Neptune, which has been the defining outer planet signature of the past several months, is already doing a slow and significant restructuring of what you understand your identity and your direction to be built from. Now Mars walks into that same territory. Mars, which is the planet of action and motion and the body's readiness to commit, walks directly into the space where Saturn is building structure from honest ground and Neptune is dissolving whatever is not ultimately real. The convergence of all three, Mars, Saturn and Neptune, in the early degrees of Aries, with Mars currently between the two outer planets and approaching its exact conjunction with Neptune, creates an atmosphere today that is simultaneously one of the most potent for genuine, irreversible direction change, and one of the most disorienting for anyone trying to navigate using their usual methods of willpower and forward momentum alone. The moon is in Aquarius today, which adds its own significant layer. Aquarius is the sign of the wider view, the perspective from above the immediate situation. The intelligence that sees not just what is happening in the individual life, but what it means inside a larger pattern, a longer timeline, a broader context. The moon in Aquarius is not an emotionally indulgent placement. It tends to produce clarity over feeling, perspective over immersion, the cool intelligence of the observer rather than the worn turbulence of the participant. This is useful today because while Mars walking into Neptune could easily tip into confusion or a loss of direction, the Aquarius moon provides a stabilizing intelligence that can perceive the pattern even when the close-up view is unclear. There is also a trine between today's Aquarius moon and Pluto in Aquarius, which has been in this sign for several years now and which governs a long, slow transformation of collective structures and individual power. The moon trine Pluto is not a loud aspect. It does not announce itself with drama, but it provides a depth of perceptual access that is unusual. The moon trine Pluto in the same sign means that the emotional intelligence available today has a Plutonian quality to it, a willingness to see underneath the surface of things, to perceive what is actually driving a situation rather than simply what the situation looks like from the outside. This is the kind of clear-eyed depth perception that becomes invaluable when Mars and Neptune are blurring the foreground. Venus is in Taurus. This is Venus in the sign it rules, comfortable and grounded and operating from genuine sensory knowledge of what it values. Venus in Taurus does not panic under atmospheric pressure. It knows what it knows through the body, through taste and touch, and the slow, honest intelligence of physical experience. In a sky that is asking you to trust something other than your usual drive as your navigation system, Venus in Taurus provides the anchor of genuine embodied value. What your body tells you it wants, what your senses confirm as real. These are the instruments to trust when the motivational compass is navigating through Neptune's territory. Jupiter remains in the late degrees of Cancer, continuing its movement toward Leo, which it will enter in late June. Jupiter in Cancer has been expanding the emotional world, deepening the relationship with what genuinely feels like home, growing the capacity for authentic belonging. Today, in this particular sky, Jupiter's Cancer position speaks to the emotional substrate beneath the Mars-Neptune question. The question is not just what direction you are moving in. It is what you are trying to move toward on the level of felt life, of genuine emotional belonging, of the home, interior or exterior, that your ambition is supposed to be building toward. The North Node remains in Pisces. Collective evolutionary direction during this period is toward trust, surrender, and the kind of deep wisdom that operates through sensitivity and compassion rather than through strategic control. The North Node in Pisces is in the sign that Neptune rules. So when Neptune modifies Mars today, it is also pointing in the same direction that the node is pointing. The fog is not random. The dissolving of your usual drive's clarity is pointing you toward a Piscean way of moving through the world, one that responds to the current rather than forcing the current, that trusts the direction of the water rather than only swimming against it. This is a sky of deep instruction. The instruction is not comfortable, but it is precise. To understand what this transit means for you specifically, it helps to understand what Mars and Neptune each represent in the architecture of the human experience, and what happens when they occupy the same degree of the zodiac. Mars is the planet of desire in its most uncomplicated form, not the reflective, negotiated desire of Venus, which considers relatedness and value and what it can offer in return for what it wants. Mars's desire is more primary than that. It is the animal knowing of what the body wants to move toward and what it wants to move away from. It is the instinctive orienting of the entire self toward a target. Mars does not deliberate for long. It does not spend much time wondering whether its desire is appropriate, or whether the timing is right, or whether the goal it is pursuing is the one it will still want when it gets there. Mars commits and it moves, and it uses its energy with a directness that every other planet's complexity tends to modify and modulate. In Aries, all of this is amplified rather than modified. Mars in Aries is the engine without the automatic governor, the ambition without the internal skeptic, the drive that has not yet learned to second-guess itself because it has not yet accumulated enough experience of arriving somewhere and finding that the thing it fought to reach was not the thing it actually needed. Mars in Aries is, in its best expression, the courage of the new beginning. The willingness to go first even when no one else is going, to commit to something before the outcome is guaranteed, to put the body in motion toward what feels right before the mind has finished deliberating. Neptune is, in almost every respect, the opposite of this. Neptune does not commit to specific outcomes. It does not sprint toward targets. It does not know what to do with a goal that has sharp edges and a measurable arrival point. Neptune moves through the world the way water moves, finding the shape of whatever container it occupies, seeking not destinations but depths, not arrivals but the dissolution of the separation between the traveler and the territory. Neptune is the planet of the mystic, the dreamer, the poet, the person who cannot live in a world made only of what is provable and touchable and already known. Neptune lives in the possible, in the imagined, in the experience of the world as something not fully solid, something interpenetrated by meaning and symbol, and the invisible current of what is trying to be born through the circumstances of the moment. When these two planets conjoin, the result is something that neither of them produces on its own. The drive meets the vision, the engine meets the fog. The clarity of aim meets the dissolving of that clarity into something larger than the original aim could contain. This can feel from inside the experience like a failure of motivation, like suddenly not knowing what you want, or knowing what you want, but not being able to access the usual urgency that turns wanting into doing. The body that is usually ready to move finds itself paused, not by fatigue or by fear, but by something more like a perceptual shift, a sudden awareness that the road ahead is not as clear as it appeared, that the destination that felt fixed and obvious requires a more nuanced navigation than Mars alone is equipped to provide. This is not a warning, it is a description. The loss of motivational clarity that many people experience around a Mars-Neptune conjunction is not a symptom of depression or of giving up or of some failure of will. It is the specific effect of a planet of precision meeting a planet of dissolution. And once you understand that the fog is the transit, rather than a problem to be pushed through or solved. You can begin to use it rather than fight it. What Neptune does to Mars at its most profound level is ask the drive to justify itself, not in the legalistic Saturnian sense of proving its worth through measurable outcomes, in the spiritual sense of asking, what is this drive in service of? What larger current is this engine part of? Is the direction this ambition is carrying you actually aligned with what your soul is trying to build in this lifetime, or has the engine simply been moving because stopping felt like failure? These are not comfortable questions. Mars does not generally like being asked to slow down long enough to answer them. But Neptune is not asking Mars to slow down. It is asking Mars to change the way it perceives its own movement. To discover that the most powerful forward motion is not always the most forceful, that sometimes the most significant advance in the direction of what actually matters to you happens in the moment you stop insisting on the direction you already chose and open to the direction that the current is indicating. In Aries, with Saturn also nearby, this moment has a further dimension. Saturn in Aries is building genuine structure, honest foundation, the framework that will still be standing in 5 years because it was constructed from real materials rather than from wishful thinking or from the momentum of past decisions that were once right but are no longer the whole story. When Mars walks through Neptune on its way to the Saturn degree, it is passing through a kind of initiation, a test not of strength but of genuine direction. The question the sky is asking is not whether you can push. It is whether what you are pushing toward is actually yours. The answer that comes through Neptune does not arrive in words. It arrives as a feeling, a quality of resonance or absence of resonance, a body response that precedes the mind's analysis. This is what makes Mars conjunct Neptune in Aries so significant. In the sign that most trusts the body's directness, the body is being asked to receive its direction not from impulse, but from the deeper, slower signal that Neptune carries. Not the animal drive of what I want right now, but the soul-level orientation of what I am genuinely here to build. The moon moves through Aquarius today, and this is not an incidental backdrop to the Mars-Neptune story. It is an active participant in the sky's teaching, offering something specific and necessary that the Mars-Neptune conjunction, operating alone, cannot provide. Aquarius sees. That is perhaps the simplest and most accurate way to describe what this sign contributes to any astrological moment it inhabits. It sees with the particular clarity of the perspective that is not fully inside the situation it is perceiving. Aquarius is the sign of the observer, the analyst, the one who can step back from the current moment and see the pattern it belongs to, the system it is part of, the longer arc of what is actually being constructed here rather than simply the immediate texture of what is happening now. When the moon is in Aquarius, this observational intelligence moves into the emotional field. The feelings available today are not primarily immersive or overwhelming, or the kind that pull you under their surface. They are the kind that illuminate. The emotion available under an Aquarius moon tends to carry information rather than simply weather. When you feel something today, there is likely a thought inside the feeling, a perception, an understanding that the feeling is pointing toward. Do not set the feeling aside before you have extracted the information it carries. The trine between today's Aquarius moon and Pluto, also in Aquarius, deepens this quality significantly. Pluto in Aquarius is one of the defining outer planet signatures of the current era, a multi-generational transit that is gradually dismantling and reconstructing the structures of collective power, collective meaning, and the systems through which human beings organize their lives together. At the individual level, Pluto in Aquarius touches the question of personal power inside collective systems. The way the self navigates the pressure of belonging to something larger without dissolving into it or being crushed by it. The trine from today's moon to this Pluto is a moment of unusual access to that deeper level of Aquarian intelligence. What this means practically is that the perceptual clarity available today has teeth. It is not merely observational in the detached, intellectually pleasant sense of being an interested spectator. It is the clarity that can see through a surface to what is driving it. The clarity that perceives the real structure of a situation, including the structure of your own motivations, with an honesty that is not unkind, but is not comfortable either. In the context of Mars walking toward Neptune, this Aquarius moon trine Pluto is enormously useful. Mars and Neptune create a fog. The Aquarius moon provides the instrument for navigating inside the fog without losing orientation. The wide view, the systemic perspective, the willingness to perceive what is actually happening rather than insisting on the reality you brought into the fog with you. The Pluto depth means that the navigation is not superficial. It is not the kind of clarity that sees the surface of a problem. It is the kind that sees the root. You may find today that you have an unusual ability to understand situations, relationships, and patterns in your life that have resisted your understanding before. Not because new information has arrived, though it may have, but because the perceptual lens of the Aquarius moon trine Pluto is giving you access to a level of seeing that is not usually this available. The question behind the question, the pattern beneath the specific instance, the real reason something keeps happening rather than the explanation you have been giving yourself for why it happens. Use this. The clarity available under the Aquarius moon is not the kind that lingers indefinitely. Moons move quickly through a sign in approximately 2.5 days. By the time Mars actually perfects its conjunction with Neptune on April 13th, the moon will have moved on. Today is the day when the Aquarius perceptual quality and the building Mars-Neptune fog exist together, and that combination is both rare and useful. The fog is moving in, the wide view is available. This is the moment to observe what the fog is revealing, not by pushing into it, but by allowing the Aquarius moon to show you from its slightly elevated vantage where the fog is densest and what that density is pointing toward. Aquarius is also the sign of the collective, of community, of the shared vision that transcends individual desire. Mars in Aries walking into Neptune is an individual transit, about the individual drive meeting something larger than individual intention. The Aquarius moon adds the dimension of the collective to this. It asks not just what you personally are being redirected toward, but what role your redirection plays in something larger. What the fog in your own motivational field has to do with the larger fog that the collective is navigating together. Whether the path you find on the other side of this Neptune moment is one that serves something beyond the purely personal. This is not a question that demands a grand answer. It is a question that asks you to hold your own experience of this transit inside a slightly wider frame than you might otherwise be inclined to use. You are not the only one whose drive is meeting Neptune right now. The transit is collective as well as individual. And what you learn in navigating it, the specific intelligence about how to move when movement cannot be forced, may be something that finds its way into service of others in ways you will only understand later. Not every zodiac sign experiences today's sky through the same domain of life. The houses that Mars, Neptune, Saturn, and the Moon activate in each sign's chart determine the territory where this transit's teaching arrives most directly. But the core question of the day is universal. What does your drive do when it cannot see clearly where it is going? And does it know how to navigate by something other than its own momentum? For Aries, today lands with unusual intimacy. Mars in your first house is the engine of your self moving through your own identity, and Neptune is in that same space. The fog today is a fog of self. Who are you, the Aries self, that is usually so certain of its own direction when the certainty is temporarily dissolved? The invitation is not to panic into a new identity or force the old one to become sharp again before its time. It is to sit briefly and courageously in the uncertainty of a self that is being remade at its edges. The moon in Aquarius, in your 11th house, is showing you that the community around you sees something in you that you cannot currently see in yourself. Let that be stabilizing. For Taurus, Mars and Neptune are activating your 12th house, which is the house of everything that happens beneath the surface of conscious awareness. The drive is meeting the unseen. Motivations that you have not been fully honest with yourself about are surfacing, not as accusations but as clarifications. Something you have been moving toward without fully admitting that you are moving toward it may be becoming harder to pretend you do not want. Venus in your first house gives you the grounded sensory self-knowledge to receive that clarification without being destabilized by it. You are more solid than the fog makes you feel, and what the fog is revealing in your 12th house is worth knowing. For Gemini, the Mars-Neptune conjunction activates your 11th house of community, collective purpose, and the vision of what you are building toward beyond the individual life. The drive meets a fog of collective direction. Something about where you thought your community or your broader social circle was heading may be becoming less clear, or a project involving others may be entering a period where the shared direction requires renegotiation. The Aquarius moon in your 9th house offers philosophical perspective on this. The larger pattern is still coherent, even when the immediate view is obscured. Trust the wider view today more than the close-up. For Cancer, Mars and Neptune are in your 10th house of career, vocation, and the public expression of your purpose. This is a significant placement. The drive meeting dissolution in the house of professional direction means that something about your vocational path is in a moment of genuine uncertainty, not failure, but the specific uncertainty of someone who has arrived at a threshold they cannot cross using only the tools that brought them to the threshold. The Aquarius moon in your 8th house of transformation and shared resources offers an unusual depth of perception into what this professional fog is actually about. It is not about external obstacles, it is about an internal realignment of what you understand your work to be for. Jupiter in your 1st house is still expanding who you are as a person. The person you are becoming requires a professional expression that the current path may not be wide enough to contain. The fog is making room. For Leo, the Mars-Neptune conjunction activates your 9th house of philosophy, belief, and the broad orienting framework through which you understand your life and your place in the world. The drive meets a fog of meaning. Something you have been certain about, at the level of belief rather than at the level of fact, is becoming uncertain. A story you have been telling yourself about why your life has gone the way it has, or what you are here to do, or what kind of future is genuinely possible for you, is softening at the edges. The Aquarius moon in your 7th house of partnership asks whether there is someone in your life whose perspective on this could be genuinely useful. Someone who sees you clearly from the outside in a way that the fog of your own beliefs prevents you from seeing yourself. This is a good day to listen. For Virgo, Mars and Neptune are moving through your 8th house of transformation, intimacy, shared resources, and the deep emotional contracts that exist beneath the surface of your conscious agreements. The drive meets the fog of depth. Something in the territory of what you share with others, financially, emotionally, energetically, is entering a period of dissolution and reformation. A power dynamic may be shifting. A financial arrangement may be becoming unclear. An emotional contract that has been operating on unspoken terms may be requiring the terms to be spoken. The Aquarius moon in your 6th house of daily life and work offers practical intelligence about how to navigate this. The question is not what the fog means philosophically. The question is, what specific, daily action is still available to you even when the larger direction is unclear? Focus there. For Libra, the Mars-Neptune conjunction lands in your 7th house of partnership, close relationship, and the significant other who mirrors your own growth back to you. The drive meets a fog of relationship. Someone you are in significant relationship with, or a relationship itself, is entering a period of unclear direction. You cannot force clarity here. Neptune does not yield to Libran diplomacy or strategic relationship management. What it yields to is genuine honesty and the willingness to feel what is actually happening between you and someone else rather than managing the surface. The Aquarius moon in your 5th house of self-expression and creativity offers the perspective that this relational fog may actually be the creative material for a new kind of expression. Something you have been unable to say or make or be within the current relational structure may be what the fog is making room for. For Scorpio, Mars and Neptune are in your sixth house of daily life, health, habits, and the practical rhythms through which you sustain your own existence. The drive meets a fog of routine. The specific path of least resistance for Scorpio today is to look honestly at what your daily life is actually sustaining. What habits, what routines, what daily commitments are genuinely in service of the person you are becoming, and which ones are simply in service of the person you used to be, maintained by momentum rather than by current, genuine choice. The Aquarius moon in your fourth house of home and roots provides the perspective of genuine emotional need beneath the question of habit. What does your body and your emotional home actually need right now, as opposed to what you have been providing it out of habit? For Sagittarius, Mars and Neptune are activating your fifth house of creativity, self-expression, play, and the laboratory of genuine self-discovery. The drive meets a fog of creative direction. Something you have been creating, or something you have been trying to express, is entering a period of unclear form. This is not a failure of creativity. This is what Neptune does to creative impulse before something genuinely new emerges. The form has to soften before it can become something it has not been before. The Aquarius moon in your third house of communication and immediate environment offers the observation that the ideas you are encountering in your ordinary daily life right now, in conversations, in what you read, in what you overhear, are not accidental. They are the raw material the fog is asking you to work with. Pay attention to what keeps appearing in your peripheral awareness. For Capricorn, the Mars-Neptune conjunction moves through your fourth house of home, family, and the deep interior roots of your life. The drive meets a fog of foundation. Something about the ground you have been building from, or the family dynamic that shaped your understanding of what solid ground looks like, is entering a period of unclear definition. The clarity that usually Capricorn finds in structure and in the measurable reality of what it has built is temporarily unavailable in this domain. The Aquarius moon in your second house of personal resources and genuine worth offers an important reorientation. The question is not whether the current foundation is solid. The question is whether the foundation you have been building was ever intended to carry the full weight of who you are, or whether it was built to accommodate who you were expected to be. The fog may be clearing space for a foundation that is actually sized for your actual self. For Aquarius, today has an unusual quality because the moon is in your own sign, trine. Pluto also in your sign. The perceptual clarity available to you today is at its most personal and most penetrating. Mars and Neptune are activating your third house of communication, thought, and the immediate world of information, conversation, and mental environment. The drive meets a fog of ideas. Something you have been certain you understood is revealing itself to be more complex than your certainty could contain. A conversation you were sure you knew the direction of has shifted. A way of thinking about a situation has begun to dissolve, leaving you in the unusual position of not knowing what you think about something that you recently thought you understood very well. This is productive. The Aquarius moon in your first house is giving you the direct perceptual access to see that this dissolution of your usual certainty is not a loss of intelligence. It is an expansion of it. Let the thinking soften, and let something more complete arrive. For Pisces, Mars and Neptune are transiting your second house of personal resources, self-worth, and the material ground of your daily life. The North Node is in your own sign. The collective evolutionary current is moving in the direction of what Pisces knows. And yet, in this second house, the drive meets a fog of value. What you are worth, what you should charge for what you offer, what material ground you deserve to be standing on, these questions are entering a period of unusual uncertainty. The temptation for Pisces under Mars-Neptune will be to undervalue, to dissolve the sense of material self-worth into a general fog of unworthiness. This is precisely the temptation to name and to refuse. The Aquarius moon in your 12th house is showing you something important. The pattern of undervaluing is old and inherited, not true. The fog in your second house is not confirming that you are worth less. It is asking you to stop using old measures to assess a worth that has genuinely grown beyond them. There is a dimension of today's sky that does not participate in the fog of Mars and Neptune. It does not dissolve or become unclear or require the kind of non-linear navigation that Neptune demands. It stands. Saturn is in Aries alongside Mars and Neptune, and while it is part of the same early Aries cluster, it contributes a quality that is the specific antidote to the disorientation that the Mars-Neptune conjunction can produce in the less grounded. Saturn in Aries is the honest accountant of new beginnings. It is the question that arrives at the doorway of every new chapter. Are you building this on ground that will hold? Saturn does not care whether the new beginning feels inspired, or whether the direction is exciting, or whether the energy of the moment feels aligned in a pleasant and validating way. Saturn cares about whether what you are building is real, whether the foundation beneath the inspiration can sustain the weight of the thing you intend to construct, whether the commitment you are preparing to make has considered the full cost of making it. In the context of Mars walking into Neptune, Saturn's presence in Aries is genuinely important, because without Saturn, the Mars-Neptune conjunction in Aries can produce a particular kind of unmoored idealism, the drive, meeting the vision without the structural intelligence to distinguish between a genuine new direction and a beautiful fog that simply feels better than the previous clarity. Neptune can produce compelling illusions. Aries energy, which moves quickly and commits without extensive deliberation, can embrace those illusions with genuine enthusiasm before testing them against the reality that Saturn demands. Saturn prevents this, not by dismissing the vision, but by asking it to demonstrate its load-bearing capacity. Saturn in Aries, in proximity to Neptune in Aries, is doing the work of identifying which aspects of the dissolving direction are genuinely being dissolved because they were never real, and which aspects are being preserved because they are built from something that will last. This is a useful function, even when it is uncomfortable, especially when it is uncomfortable. The resistance you may feel from Saturn today, the sense that certain hopeful conclusions are not quite supported, that certain inspiring new directions require more honest examination before you can fully commit, is not a punishment or a limitation on your genuine possibilities. It is Saturn doing its most valuable work, helping you distinguish between what is genuinely available to you and what is simply what you wish were available, dressed in the convincing aesthetic of Neptune's visions. The way to work with Saturn in this sky is not to use it as a reason to dismiss what Mars-Neptune is trying to show you. The visions that Neptune produces around Mars are not all illusions. Some of them are the most accurate directional information your soul has produced in years, but they need to pass through Saturn's filter. They need to be held up against the honest question of what it would actually take to move in this direction, what it would require you to give up, what it would require you to build, what the realistic version of this vision looks like, as distinct from the Neptune version, which has the advantage of being beautiful and the disadvantage of leaving out the cost. The interplay of Saturn and Neptune in the same sign, which has been the defining background signature of the past several months, comes into sharp relief today when Mars walks into the picture. Mars is the activating agent. It takes the slow background conversation between Saturn and Neptune, the conversation about what is real versus what is idealized, about what the future could genuinely be versus what you wish it would be, and it makes that conversation urgent, present tense, requiring a response in the near term rather than an ongoing philosophical consideration. The response does not need to be final. Mars conjunct Neptune is not the moment of final decision. It is the moment of genuine inquiry. The moment of letting the drive stop insisting on its previous direction long enough to feel whether there is a truer direction available. Saturn's role is to ensure that whatever direction emerges from that inquiry is real enough to build from. Trust Saturn today as much as you trust Neptune. The structure and the dissolution are working together. The honest cost accounting and the expanded vision are both necessary. The direction that emerges from the conversation between all three, the drive, the dissolution, and the structural honesty, is the direction worth moving in. The sky on April 11, 2026, does not exist in isolation from what comes immediately before and after it. The Mars-Neptune conjunction that is building today perfects on April 13th, 2 days ahead. The new moon in Aries arrives on April 17th. These 3 points in time form a sequence that has a coherence worth understanding. The period between now and the exact Mars-Neptune conjunction on April 13th is the period of the building fog. The approach, the gradual softening of whatever has felt certain about the direction your drive has been carrying you. This is not the moment to push harder in the old direction or to make quick, decisive commitments based on the motivational energy that is actually, in this window, somewhat misleading. Mars approaching Neptune gives the feeling of movement and urgency without the clarity of reliable direction. Any decision made purely on the basis of the current urgency, without the Neptune-informed questioning of what that urgency is actually in service of, risks being a decision made inside the fog rather than through it. What is useful in this window, from now through April 13th, is exactly what is uncomfortable for most people who are accustomed to trusting their drive as their primary navigation instrument. It is useful to pause, to let the question of direction remain open for a few days longer than feels comfortable, to notice what rises in the absence of forward momentum, what becomes visible when the engine stops and the silence allows the subtler signals to be heard. Neptune's information arrives in the quieter registers, in the peripheral awareness, in the dream that feels too specific to be random, in the pull towards something that your rational mind has been filing under later, or maybe someday, or that is not practical enough to pursue. Mars conjunct Neptune is one of the few transits where the most productive use of the planet of action is to withhold action long enough to discover what action is actually in service of. This is not laziness. It is intelligence of a kind that Mars does not naturally access, and that Neptune is specifically equipped to provide. After the exact conjunction on April 13th, Mars continues moving through Aries, still in proximity to Saturn, still building toward the confrontation with the structural honesty that Saturn represents. In the days between April 13th and April 19th, when Mars approaches its conjunction with Saturn, the clarity that was dissolved by Neptune begins to reassemble. But it reassembles in a different form than it had before the Neptune encounter. What emerges is not the old drive restored to its previous direction. It is a drive that has been refined by the question Neptune asked, a commitment to a direction that has passed through the dissolving and come out on the other side with its genuinely essential elements intact. This is the sequence the sky is offering. The drive meets the fog. The fog asks the question. The structural honesty tests whatever answer emerges. And the new moon in Aries on April 17th, falling in the window after Mars has moved through both Neptune and is approaching Saturn, offers the genuine new beginning energy with the full, tested clarity of a direction that has earned its own certainty. The new moon in Aries is one of the most initiating lunations in the annual Zodiac calendar. It is the seed moment, the point in the year when the sky offers its purest concentration of genuine beginning energy. But what you plant at the Aries new moon will grow according to the direction you have honestly identified as yours. The work of this window, from now through April 17th, is the work of honest discernment. What direction, having passed through Neptune's fog and Saturn's structural testing, still feels genuinely yours? That is the direction to plant of the new moon. Venus in Taurus will continue grounding this sequence in sensory embodied knowing. When you cannot trust the mind's certainty, which this window is specifically designed to disrupt, you can trust the body's knowing. What makes your physical body relax versus brace? What makes you lean toward something rather than away from it? Venus in Taurus is the instrument of genuine embodied value, and in a sky full of dissolution and structural questioning, it offers the one form of knowing that Neptune cannot meaningfully dissolve. The body knows. It has always known. And what it knows directly, without the mediation of narrative or the distortion of wishful thinking. Jupiter in Cancer, in its final months of this transit, continues expanding the emotional intelligence that understands the difference between what you genuinely need and what you have been substituting for what you genuinely need. The emotional home, the sense of belonging to something real, the intimacy of being known rather than simply seen. These are the emotional reference points that the new moon in Aries will ask you to plant your next chapter in genuine service of, not in the abstract aspiration of what you think you should want. In the concrete, emotionally real experience of what you have already begun to feel more capable of wanting since Jupiter started expanding that territory last year. The sky ahead is rich and it is moving. What this window asks is that you move with it rather than ahead of it, that you trust the fog long enough to learn what it came to teach, and that you arrive at the new moon on April 17th, not with the old certainty restored, but with something more honest than certainty, the clear-eyed readiness of someone who knows, having been through the dissolving, what actually remains when the non-essential is cleared away. That is a more powerful beginning than any beginning launched from the previous direction before the fog arrived to refine it. If this message reached something real in you today, share it with someone who might be navigating their own version of this fog. Leave a comment with what the Mars-Neptune question is surfacing in your life right now. And stay close to this channel because what the sky is building toward in the weeks ahead is worth watching from the beginning. Until then, trust the process more than the fog makes that easy to do. What is dissolving needed to dissolve, and what remains is the real thing.